Today on Join Us in France, guest Patrick Béja and I try to make sense of the terrible terror attacks of November 13th in Paris from a French perspective. I had mentioned in episode 51 that I might do an episode someday on why Muslim women cannot cover their hair in France. This is it. This is Join Us in France, episode 92. Hello, I'm Annie, and Join Us in France is a podcast about all things French. Today, I bring you an interview with a very interesting Frenchman who is also a podcaster and lives in Paris. And we discuss the events of November 13th in Paris from our unique French perspective. And we do get into why religious symbols are not allowed in certain places in France. Short announcement. At the end of the interview, you'll be able to hear Elise and I rhapsodize about Thanksgiving in France. She brings comic relief at the end of an otherwise rather serious episode. And she'll be on next week also with a very silly topic. Another big announcement. To go along with this episode, I created a PDF list of 15 things you should do to stay safe in France, no matter when you come to visit. Some of these things you may already know, but some of them you may not have thought of. These are simple and effective steps that anybody can take. This PDF is going to be available to anybody who is subscribed to the Join Us in France email list. The link to get the PDF will be in the body of the email I send out once a week to announce each new episode. So if you are already subscribed to the email list, make sure emails from Join Us in France go to your main inbox and not promotion or spam or whatever, and open it and click on the link to get the extra content. If you're not already subscribed, well, go do that and look for your Join Us in France email in your email box next Saturday. All you have to do is go to joinusinfrance.com and look for the sign up box with the green button on the left. I only send out one email per week and I never share my list with anybody else. So you will not be able to blame me for too much email because I don't like that any more than you do. But I think it's important for me to know just a tiny bit about the people who listen to this show. So I want to give you an extra incentive to sign up for the weekly email and actually open it. Also, one last and very important announcement. Thank you, David Palachek, for your generous donation. It is wonderful to have so many of you support the show. Much appreciated. And now, on to the episode with Patrick Béja. Hello, Patrick. Very nice to talk to you.
Hey, how are you doing? Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for coming on. I thought it was I listened to your podcast, the Phileas Club, and I thought, after the events, I thought, who can I discuss this with a person who's interested in discussing current events? And your name popped into my mind, but I thought you would say no. So I'm very happy.
Why would I? No, of course, I'm always happy to guest on shows and to discuss with people who are interested in these things. I'm mostly in the tech and gaming field, but I'm also very interested in these topics. And whenever we were discussing a little bit before the show, and I was telling you basically I'm a podcaster because I like to say what I think. Yep. And when these things happen, especially, I have millions of thoughts in my mind that I want to express and share. So
wonderful.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Well, thank you. Okay, right. Let's remind people what happened briefly. I mean, the events are known. Friday, November 13th, it started with an explosion at the Stade de France. outside of the Stade de France, thankfully. The security did its job and did not let the suicide bombers in. And then 5 minutes later, there were shots fired against a Cambodian restaurant and a cafe, Carillon and the Petit Cambodge, in the 10th arrondissement, right by the Canal Saint-Martin, which is a very hip place as far as visitors are concerned. So, and then 9:36 is when the attack on the Bataclan. No, 9:45 is when the attack on the Bataclan started. So anyway, there were a bunch of things going on all at once. And were you in Paris at the time?
No, I was actually in Helsinki for a couple of days on a family matter, which made it obviously, better because it felt safer, but at the same time it was very strange because I was away from a city I live in and have lived in for a long time.
Right. So do you live near where these events took place, or?
No, I live in the west of the city, so I was never. I don't really go to those arrondissements very often. I do go there. I mean, like everyone in Paris, there are lots of restaurants and places in there. So you would go there every month, every couple of weeks. So,
right.
But mostly it was, you have friends who might be there. And
of course. Yeah, I have family who also live on the west side of Paris and one in Versailles. And, of course I checked on them and they were all fine. So
yeah, I think it feels strange because that even though the death toll was horrifying, it's still a relatively small number of people compared to the number of people that live in the city. So statistically, it's very unlikely that you're going to know someone that was affected. But at the same time, with a couple of degrees of separation, everyone knows someone that was affected.
Yes. And it just grabs you at the throat, I mean, when you hear about something like this, I had gone to bed very early that night and I woke up in the night and my husband was still up watching the news and I was like, what is going on? And it just grabs you. It's like, it's a terrible thing. Anyway.
Yeah. It's even honestly, I mean, compared to the events of January with the attacks on Charlie Hebdo, it's even more difficult to grasp or more impactful. Mm-hmm. And that's saying something because obviously those events were absolutely terrible already.
Yeah.
But there was some kind of rationalization that you could do to deal with it. It was like the targets were journalists. They were people who were provocateurs, right? They were, and they were kind of the people who are trying to steer up things by being controversial.
Correct.
Here, it was just, people sitting at a cafe terrace, and it feels more like it could be you, I guess. But
right. And then, it's also the first time that we've had a kamikaze type attack, people strapping bombs around their bodies and blowing themselves up in France. That had never happened before. And the other thing that is a little bit different is that the état d'urgence, so the state of emergency, was declared right away and has been prolonged for 3 months by a vote of parliament. The way it works in France is the president can declare a state of emergency. That's in effect for 12 days. And beyond 12 days, the president needs to get it approved by the legislators. And it happened.
Yeah.
And so it changes life in France a little bit, but not for regular people, right?
No, yeah. I mean, it doesn't really change much on your day-to-day. You're probably going to see more police forces, military forces in the street, but it impacts things like the right to assign someone to residence and increased surveillance powers, and they don't need the police forces don't need legislative approval on some of their actions that they do in regular times, things like that, which are, I think, as much as I am wary of increased surveillance and these kinds of things. You know, on the tech front, we always discuss the right balance between security and privacy. And I usually, in the past few years, I've fallen on the side of privacy because of a number of reasons. Mm-hmm. But in this case, I think there are limitations in time and not gravity, I'm sorry, the seriousness of the situation
exactly.
that coupled with the limitations make this, I don't think you'll find many people arguing that it shouldn't be done.
Yeah. Well, for instance, one of the things that the police can now do is they can do a perquisition, which is like a search and seizure. But, I mean, a very muscled search and seizure. Obviously, they show up with assault, everything.
Well, it's search and seizure. It can be, if in the case of terrorism, they're going to show up with weapons, obviously. Yeah. But in general, a perquisition can just be a search. They have the right to enter your apartment or to search your computer, that kind of thing. It doesn't have to be with guns.
Correct. So, but normally, in normal times, a judge has to approve of the perquisition, and right. Now the police can just decide when it's time and then talk it over later with a judge. So it's the things are reversed. Also, it used to be that the perquisition had to be between 6 a.m. and 9 p.m., I think it was. And now they can do it any time of the day. So they will show up in the middle of the night, pretty much.
Yeah. Which again is only possible during that state of emergency.
Exactly.
It's not.
Exactly. I haven't heard very much about surveillance as far as cameras and internet surveillance and that sort of thing. Have you kept your ear to the ground on those things?
So, yes, they want to adapt the state of emergency laws that were voted a very long time ago and defined a long time ago to make them more relevant and current to, what's necessary today. There are things like, for example, they included the control of the press
right.
before, and that has been removed, which even for that, some people have argued that it shouldn't be because in the attacks in January, the media has been making mistakes, like giving information in live on air that could help the attackers or the terrorists.
Yeah, notably BFM TV at the time. Yeah. It's a French TV and radio station, and they jumped the gun and divulged information that would have been better not to divulge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is something that was problematic, but anyway, the press restrictions have been lifted from the law, but at the same time they have included elements of computerized surveillance, and I don't know specifically about the right. cameras, but they have included additional powers in that law.
Right. London is like chock full of public surveillance cameras. Paris didn't have near as many. No French city had near as many. They have a few here and there, but only in areas where they've made arrests before and they know it might be a problem spot.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to see more surveillance cameras popping up here and there in France. And, we could argue forever on this. But in a case like this, I'm like you. I'm normally not in favor, but maybe there's a good reason at this time to keep an eye on what's going on.
Yeah.
And especially later, as you do probably it's not going to help you catch the guy in the act. But what it's going to do is it's going to let you prove that this was the person involved, right? So, and you need that too.
I really think that even people who are cautious against the extended powers of the government are going to be okay with, as long the problem is when you don't see the end of those special powers.
Yeah.
And in this case, it is clearly defined. You have 12 days and extended to 3 months. Mm-hmm. And after that, you should be done, or at least there's a question of, do you have the right to extend them?
Yeah.
Which is what we probably need. It becomes very problematic when things have, unlimited
no expiration. It's a problem. Hollande, the French president, François Hollande, is talking about modifying the constitution. He's arguing in favor of modifying the constitution to include some of these extra powers, especially for assigning people in residence. And maybe he'll get them, maybe he won't. That has to be voted on. So we'll see.
Yeah, it seems he probably will get a lot of the things he's asking for, which I don't really have a comment specifically. I mean, there are things like taking away someone's nationality, things like when you assign someone to residence, they have to have a electronic bracelet, things like that, which I don't know specifically. I think most of them seem reasonable. I haven't seen all of them, but all of them seem reasonable.
Yeah, this morning I read about one that he wants to change, where it's somebody who is assigned to residence will have their internet searched. Their internet usage will be scrutinized.
Yes, or even limited, or completely removed.
Which makes sense. I mean, these are people who are sympathizers with extreme.
So I think, and just to be the devil's advocate for a second here, I think right now it's very easy to see the cases where it makes sense and to approve all of this. But also it in these situations when we are making decisions motivated by, I don't want to say fear, because that's maybe not the case for everyone, but at least motivated by urgency. I think it's very important to actually stop for a second and think about the long-term implications. Yeah. And what I immediately go through is what happens, when these decisions are applied to too many people, or maybe not too many people, but how do you decide who is actually worthy of that kind of action? Do you start saying anyone we have something called the Fiche S, which is basically Fiche Sécurité, I think, or anyway, it's kind of a note for information on people who are people you should survey, you should keep an eye on, basically.
Yeah.
And there are, I think, 10,000 people on that list in France. So obviously, I don't think we're going to assign to resident 10,000 people. No. So where do you place that limit where that person should be assigned to residence, or when they're okay? And then there are going to be mistakes. So aren't people going to be tempted to go overboard? Or
how do you ask to be removed if there was a mistake? There has to be limitations and review process and all that put in place. 10,000 seems like a lot. I didn't realize there were 10,000 people with this Fiche S business. That's quite a few.
Yeah, that's my understanding. But
that's the equivalent of the American no-fly list, right? I
thought it was larger. I thought the no-fly list was larger, but
the no-fly list is huge, and you always hear about people that are put on there by mistake. It doesn't happen every day, but it happens to enough people. It even happened to a legislature. I think a Texas state legislator his name was the same as someone
was on the no-fly
on the no-fly list, and it took some time to get it removed.
Yeah, when I was talking about mistakes, I wasn't even talking about the positive quote unquote mistakes. I was talking about the horrible ones, the ones where you have someone, let's say, who's on one of those Fiche S, and you don't assign them to residence. You decide, okay, that person is not so dangerous. We think that they should be okay, and they end up being someone who perpetrates an attack. And I think it's very important to realize that we are going to be making decisions to the best of our abilities, but there might be a mistake. And the fact that there's going to be a mistake is not reason enough to lock everyone that you think might sometime, at some point be a terrorist in a cage. And that is the kind of extreme that I think is very hard to visualize in a time like this. However, I'm not saying that I don't think those measures are justified. I think in this case, as long as, I'm hopeful that it's not going to be done badly and that people who make those decisions of assigning to residents and things like that are going to stay on the right side of.
Yes, and I'm with you there. And my level of confidence is fairly good that they will do a decent job. Yeah. But that's of course it's always subject to political decisions, and so politics will change, and there will be different deciders, and you have to think it through for the long term. But do you think France? Are you going to change anything about your daily life in Paris as a result of this? How do you think France will change?
I don't. Well, on a daily life basis, I don't think it's going to. I certainly hope it's not going to. The reaction is usually. For daily life, I don't think it's going to change, and I hope it's not going to. People are going to keep going out. It's not like people are suddenly not going out to have coffees and terraces. Right. It's the effect there, I don't think is going to be felt at all. You might have, some people who are a little bit more careful in the first few weeks, or who there's going to be increased military presence for a while. These kinds of things.
Machine guns out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people have been saying we will not change our way of life because that's what they want.
Right.
And I think for the most part, on the let's keep going out to have coffee aspect of our way of life, I think I'm confident it's going to apply.
Yeah.
What I'm a little bit more worried about is what we were talking about in the, legislative process, and the surveillance issues and things like that, where I think a lack of understanding on the people who are making those decisions and voting those laws might lead to some worrisome actions. Especially, there's a lot of discussion about secure messaging and cryptography and backdoors in messaging services. And there, I think that it's going to be a tough battle. It's going to be tough to convince people that requiring backdoors is a bad idea. But, we'll see.
Yeah. I think for people who are here as a visitor, as a tourist, I have heard that about 10% of the people who had bookings this week in Paris canceled, and another 30% postponed. So it doesn't seem like a terribly bad idea to me. Honestly, if I had planned a vacation to Paris this week, but I might postpone it because it's inconvenient. You're going to have more searches. You're going to have more obvious police presence out. And there's still, the French police and army are on the attack. And so they will do raids on various places where they have suspects.
Yeah, I completely understand those reactions, and they're absolutely reasonable. Like, I understand why they would decide to postpone or cancel even, but it's also important to realize that
the likelihood of you being caught in that is very small. But
exactly. But obviously, if it happens, you're like, well, duh.
Yeah, if it happens to you, you're 100%.
Exactly. But the likelihood is so small. You're probably more likely to be involved in a car accident in the next year than you are, or in your whole life, than you are of being a victim of those attacks. As horrifying as those numbers are. It's still,
people are silly. They say there was this thing going around social media where they had this picture of this woman who was supposedly at 3 attacks: the Boston Marathon bombing, Paris, and there was another one. Well, it was a hoax, okay? It wasn't true.
It was just people looking for pattern. It's probably, I'm guessing Reddit, which I'm a big fan of, or
like
4chan, or one of those places where people have a lot of time on their hands, and they're and they're probably distressed, and they're trying to look for things, and some kind of pattern recognition engages, and then a person that looks kind of similar because they have long hair and the same color hair and the same body type, and you're like, oh my God, it's the same person at 3 different places. It's a you put your tinfoil hat.
That's
but
right.
beyond that, I think it's the important thing to understand as well is that I've been saying this on different shows I've been on, but it's important to realize that the only weapon that the terrorists have, the only weapons they have is in their name. It's fear. And because they cannot defeat us militarily. It is, it's ridiculous to think that what are they going to do? They're going to invade. They're going to come in France and kill everyone? No. They can do targeted, limited attacks that they hope are going to provoke fear. That is the only weapon they have. So the best way of defeating them is to not be afraid and to not cancel your plans and to not, and I understand it's easier said than done. And I am currently, as convinced of this as I am. I went out yesterday, I went in the metro, and, I was looking around. I was a little bit uncomfortable, and it's very hard for you to actually, practice
you're human,
what you're preaching. Exactly.
Yeah, you're human. You're going to have these sorts of moments of weakness, obviously. Yeah. Okay, now I want to move on to something a little bit more in the, like, trying to make sense of this. Like I told you, I have published another episode. It was 51 after the Charlie Hebdo attacks, where I explained the whole idea of secularism in France and why the right to blaspheme is so important to people. And at the time, I had mentioned that I might do a show on this was all about the law of 1905, which changed a lot of things for France as far as secularism is concerned. Today, I want to touch on the more prickly subject of the law of 2004, which everybody's heard of because that's the law against wearing a veil in France. And I have no idea what your opinion is on this, Patrick. So I'm kind of going out on a limb here, but I want to explain a little bit that French people, we have a strange history when it comes to secularism. We even have 2 words for it. We have one, secularism, and another one, laïcité. In English, you have the term lay clergy, right? Lay clergy is a person who participates in religious things without being formally trained. So it's someone who doesn't have a PhD in theology, but still participates. Well, in France, it has a very different meaning. In France, it means it's a person without theology, period. Not just without enough theology to participate in church, but without theology. So it's the person that you can trust to not roll over when the priest says, if you don't do this, you'll burn in hell, kind of thing. And it's because in France we have this idea that we need to be protecting ourselves against the power of church. Because church has had a ton of power in France, and we're very wary of that. And so it used to be that we were worried about the power of the Catholic Church, and now, unfortunately, all of that fear has moved, that's still in the culture, has moved towards fear of Muslims. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think you're being a little bit definitive. There is definitely a fear of Muslims to an extent. I think there are some people that are being very unreasonable and painting all of Islam with the same brush. Mm-hmm. But I think most people, and we've seen this expressed against that brand of racism in the past few days, most people are going to be very adamant that we shouldn't paint everyone with the same brush. And
that's true.
I would argue that the laïcité that you're mentioning still applies not only to Islam, but also to religion in general. I mean, it's very difficult for someone who is not French to understand the relationship that French people have with religion. And I think it's very difficult to understand that this is not as conflictual as people might think, because in their culture or country, they have religion as an integral part of their society, and anything that is spoken against religion immediately becomes a societal debate, and usually a heated one. And I'm thinking about America, maybe more specifically there.
Yeah.
But in France, it really isn't like that. You might see spikes of debate here and there. We've had, the gay marriage debates that were tainted by questions of religion to an extent. But for the most part, the norm is really do whatever you want. Can we curse on this show? Maybe not.
Well, it's
let's not. Yeah, okay. But do whatever you want, but don't bother us with it.
Yeah.
And by us, I mean other people. Yeah. And that is where the questions and debate, and by the way, this goes smoothly, usually.
For the most part, it's very smooth.
Yeah.
The big problem I have with the way the French have been almost so attached to their right to blaspheme and their right to be anti-religious that in reality, when I was growing up in France, and I'm older than you are, I'm pretty sure, there were...
How old are you?
I'm 50.
Okay, not so much older. I'm 41.
Oh, well, then,
actually 42.
Oops.
Sorry, go ahead.
See, that's old age. You forget how old you are. When I was growing up, we never had any of these issues. Nobody covered their hair in school. It was not an issue. It's just that I didn't live in France at the time, so I don't even know which political party went on the offense. But they decided that they wanted to stick it to people who want to show that they are religious, of which there were very few. There were probably a few thousand in the whole of France, right? And they created this law saying, we outlaw, you can't put a veil over your head, and you can't go to church, you can't go to school like that, you can't go to a public building like that. All these limitations. And the actual effect that has had is that people had the opposite reaction, and people cover up more than they did today.
So I would be a little bit more measured. I think it's a very difficult issue to untangle, because you kind of get into the question of, was that reaction actually created by a real situation, or was it fear and exaggeration that placed issues where they weren't really any? Yeah. And honestly, I'm not quite sure where I fall on that one. We have to remember that there is I've been on Twitter in the past few days telling anyone who wants to hear and screaming at the top of my lungs that we should not be making the mistake of condemning Islam and condemning Muslims in general. It's a very specific issue that we have, and it is with radical extremists that happen to preach a certain brand of Islam, which is very different from a lot of others.
From the rest, yeah.
From the rest. But that being said, I also think it would be a mistake to be blind to the fact that there is brand or a current in some neighborhoods of France that preaches a very extreme form of Islam the heart of France. And the fringes, the more acceptable fringes of that movement express themselves in ways that are very, I want to say, hurtful to the idea of laïcité and secularism that France is so attached to exactly because of those reasons. So when we're saying the veil, we're not talking about the headscarf. I think the headscarf is fine and people are wearing them and that's not really an issue. We're talking about ostentatoire.
Right.
I think that is more, maybe a full burqa, for example, would be something that is an issue. And the problem is, the big question becomes, do you accept this because of religious tolerance, or do you condemn it because it is actually changing the way of life and the culture of a country in a negative way, which I am extremely attached to the rights of women. And a lot of those issues are manifested in encroaching of those rights, the idea that women, and this has become an issue that is being discussed in a very real way. Do women have the right to be in the same establishment as men? Should they be examined by a male doctor? We've heard about issues of the bus drivers in difficult neighborhoods being hired there were social tensions, and the company that operates the buses in France hired people who were from those neighborhoods and who were accepted by those. But with a lot of them, there were, a few dozen, maybe not insane amounts, but maybe 80 or something like that, people who would not want to drive a bus that had been driven by a woman, or who would not say hello to the women coming in the bus, and things like that. So
that was extremely shocking to me too. I thought, geez, that what have we come to? Oh, and there are doctors. I heard this story. This was in a small rural hospital near where I live. This woman was pregnant and had to go into the hospital to deliver sooner than expected. She had picked a nurse midwife to assist her in the birth, a woman, but the baby came too soon. She got rushed to the hospital, which was the right thing. But then it was a male doctor. The attending that night was a doctor, and it's a small hospital, and he's the one who does births, right? Well, when the birth was done, the husband of this woman punched him in the face because he objected to him touching his wife. Well, dude.
Yeah. I think,
he's a doctor. What cave did you crawl out of?
Exactly. And I think those horrendous incidents, I don't think we should, overstate those things, but
in France, they happen.
Yeah. And I think what was happening in 2004, and it was kind of a reaction to the trend, right? To the realization that there is some of this. And France is a very left-leaning country where it's very important to be tolerant and to be, I think, without any political affiliation, I think we're seeing now that to be culturally relativist to a fault, and to accept things because that are different because they are different. But I think we're realizing now that this is, maybe we've gone a little bit too far, and there are some things that are just not acceptable, period, even when they are justified by a tradition or a religious tradition. And those things, obviously when you take the example of the person punching a doctor in the face, everyone is going to agree that, yes, this is unacceptable. But if you expand that line of thinking, you will say, my religion forbids me from eating pork. So can my kids have no pork meals in school when they go to school? And I think said like that, it would be reasonable that you're going to say, yes, it's okay to accommodate these kinds of things, but then you expand, and where do you set the line, I guess, is the question.
French people. See, this is an interesting conversation because you're obviously a lot more French than I am that way. Because most French people think, well, yeah, why would we have to accommodate? But to me, I mean, Jews can eat pork, Muslims can eat pork, and vegetarians don't want to eat pork either. So it would be fine to do a vegetarian meal.
Yeah,
I don't see anything wrong with that. And especially since I live in a small village outside of Toulouse. And in our village, we have a school that probably has a couple hundred of kids for the elementary school. And it's a lovely little rural school. But there, I was surprised when we arrived from America that I couldn't send my daughter to school with her lunch. You either eat at the school lunch or you don't, but you don't bring anything else. And so I was like, well, but what if she had like medical issues that she couldn't, I mean, she doesn't, but in America, you're used to being able to, if your kid has an issue with a specific food, well, you just send them to school with their lunch and that's the end of that. But you can't do that in France.
Well, I think if it was a medical issue, I'm sure it could be arranged, but.
Right, but what if it's a religious issue? Then
that's
you have
different.
then you have to make a big deal out of it. And I think it would be more elegant if we left religion out of it entirely and give them a vegetarian meal.
Yeah, but that's the problem. I think it wasn't a problem until maybe 15 years ago. And obviously we had, Muslim people and Jewish people that were going to school. And I don't remember it exactly, but I'm fairly sure we didn't force, Muslims and Jewish or vegetarians to eat meat, right? Or to eat pork. No. I don't think that was an issue at that point, but it's become one. When I was saying earlier, it's fine to religion. We're absolutely fine with religion as long as it doesn't bother anyone else. And we've gotten into that field with Islam specifically, where it does encroach on other people's, way of life. The idea that someone should not, a male doctor should not treat a female patient. And that is, is it outrageous on the face of it? I think it is. It could be interpreted as a rule of Islam. A Muslim person could say, yes, it's not a big deal. Let's just find a female doctor. And
right, but in rural France, you can't.
Yeah, but every one of those issues taken individually becomes kind of manageable and acceptable. But as a whole, it does attack the idea that in France, religion is, you keep it to yourself and you don't, bother society with it. Because in France, I think in other countries, religion might be the unifying factor, or patriotism even. In France, patriotism is always a little bit suspect. You're going to associate it with, far right movements and things like that. Religion, we are wary of religion because of, history and quite frankly, I think in the French mind, the main problem with religion, it bases your decision in something other than reason. It bases your decision on rules that cannot be questioned.
Right, and they're arbitrary, yeah.
Exactly. Well, maybe not even arbitrary. I think if you go back far enough, there are reasons for a lot of things. But yeah, in today's world, they're arbitrary. And so no patriotism, no religion. What are you left with? You're left with the Republic. And in France, every child is a child of the Republic. Every citizen is a member of this common society that we're building together, and we all have the same, we're all.
That's the ideal.
Obviously.
That's the ideal, unless you're named Mohammed. Then the Republic isn't so nice to you. I mean, honestly. There
is definitely a very clear issue. I mean, that's something we haven't mentioned, but for those who don't know, we've had a couple of generations of immigration after World War II, basically, if we want to go a little bit into history mode. After World War II, we've had a lot of immigration from Northern Africa mainly, because we needed to rebuild the country. And there was cheap labor, which was basically imported from Africa, and mostly from Northern Africa. And we needed to, to give them places to live. So we built cities and on the periphery of Paris and on other big towns.
Toulouse
and
too, yeah.
Toulouse and, others as well. And we just said, all right, go live there. And the cities were very poorly planned, and they ended up being very poor neighborhoods that were not
and almost 100% segregated.
Yes, very, very much segregated. And so it creates a social situation where you have children, second, third generation born of that immigration that are now French, but that feel very disenfranchised from French society and that are very ostracized very often France has had a very, very hard time accepting the fact that these populations are actually just French. And the fact that people named, Mohammed and that come with that cultural heritage are actually just as French as someone who's named Charles and who was born in the center of Paris.
Right.
So yeah, there is definitely a certain brand of racism that.
Yeah. And France has this idea that when you come to France, you leave your religion and your culture at the door and you become one of us. But it doesn't work like that in reality, because we're not colorblind or religious blind. We're human. And so I think it would be more advantageous for France to have more of a multicultural, yes, it's okay to come to France and celebrate your heritage, so long as you treat your women decently and all of that sort of thing. I mean, my husband...
honestly, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think this is the core of the issue that we're faced with now. I think a lot of people, there are some extremists, and they're the far right is gaining ground in an alarming way. But a lot of people have been preaching exactly that, saying, and that's what I was saying when I was saying cultural relativism, which is a big issue. It's, the idea that something should be accepted because it's just a different culture, so you can't judge it by your own standards. And that's been applied a lot in the discussions we've had about the veil and about the food in school and about the interactions between men and women, and whether or not we should have dedicated times in swimming pools for women and things like that. And
yeah, that's just crazy talk. That's never going to happen.
So that's the problem, that in the idea of cultural acceptance, some of those things should be accepted, or it could be argued that some of those things should be accepted.
Okay, but maybe a time and place. Maybe you could say, well, we're having a special day today. Today is segregated day. Bring your kids to the pool. Women only. Okay.
Well,
maybe we could have a few days like that at the public pool. But it shouldn't be like that every day.
Why not in libraries? Why not have, dedicated female doctors?
You've thought it through, haven't you?
Yeah, I haven't really. It's just that.
Yeah, you're right.
I'm just pointing out the issue that it's not an easy. I mean, right now, we're thinking we have just been attacked. So obviously, I think there's going to be a lot more, well, no, this is not acceptable. This we shouldn't. But the same conversation being had 2 weeks ago would have yielded very different results, because you want to be accepting and you want to be tolerant and you want, those different cultures that come from different places to integrate and to feel welcome. So what I'm saying is, it is incredibly hard to make the quote unquote right decision at those points.
Yeah,
And,
you're right. But I think it was a big mistake in 2004 to package this decision to not have ostentatious signs of religion on your person, to say it was a religious issue. They could have said it was a safety issue. And then, if it's a safety issue, then you can't wear a ski mask. You can't have a motorcycle
it is what they said.
Helmet. Well,
I mean,
well,
people aren't complete idiots either. I mean, some people are somewhat idiotic, but it is very obvious when you're discussing these kinds of things that everyone knows what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. So it's not like the law says you can't wear a Islamic veil. You can't wear a Muslim veil, right?
Yeah.
It says you can't cover your face. And so I believe it does, at least.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I should look at it.
But I think everyone knew what we were talking about. And even more importantly, this is exactly what was important to discuss. Mm-hmm. I guess if you want to put it harshly, the question is, how tolerant do we want to be? Mm-hmm. And if we accept the veil, do we accept the female doctors in case of, if there isn't an emergency? And if we accept that, do we accept the pools? And if we, and a lot of people will say...
where do we stop? Where does the buck stop?
Yeah. And a lot of people will say, and again, this is difficult to understand for people who are not French. A lot of people will say, well, it's very easy. We stop at religion. Religion is something that should not impact others and should not impact society. So, if you want to wear a small cross on your as a necklace, that's fine. Go nuts. If you want to wear the kippah, okay, just do it.
Do you see many of those, by the way?
Yeah, in some neighborhoods, and honestly, I'm seeing more and more, and I'm seeing more and more kasher restaurants. And I'm seeing more and more kosher. Kosher restaurants and kosher supermarkets. And it's not like it bothers me enormously, but it does tickle my French mind a little bit. It's like this didn't exist 15 years ago or 20 years ago. And it does create schisms. It does point a finger to, we are like this and you are not. And it's again, it goes against the idea of we are all children of the Republic and we're all the same.
Mm-hmm. So for you, it would be better if, in reality, this whole, be one of us, become French, and we don't want to hear about your religion. If it worked better, you think it would be a better country?
So again, this is a very extreme
well,
way of putting it.
Trying to push your buttons, yeah.
Yeah, no, I understand, but I mean, I think it again. It was better before. When I was young, when I was in school, it really wasn't an issue. And again, I really want to stress this fact. It's not like we didn't have religion. It's not like we don't accept religion. We are incredibly accepting of religion. I mean, you walk 2 meters in France, you're going to step on a church. Yeah. You're going to see, mosques here and there. You're going to see, temples and it's perfectly fine. It is really not a problem. We're not saying stop practicing your religion. Absolutely not. And I would fight someone who would say this.
So yeah, your right to practice your religion is protected in France.
Yeah. But it feels like religion, and this is the deep sentiment of a French person. When you become quote unquote too religious, it always seems to divide people. When you have too much religion, it then pushes people's buttons, and then you're going to start having those questions of, what can you eat? What can you do? And if you go to the restaurant and you don't, you say, oh, I don't eat pork, so I'm going to have the beef or whatever. Okay, it's fine. No worries.
Yeah.
And But when you have
you don't even have to tell them. You can just order whatever you want.
Yeah, exactly. But when you have a lot of kosher restaurants, and again, on the Jewish side of things, I don't think we're quite there yet. It's just a trend that I think that tickles me the wrong way. But when you have a lot of those, when you have a lot of, halal places,
they're all
it's
over
still
the
fine.
place.
They're everywhere, and it's still fine. I'm not saying they're not. It's just that it drives a wedge between people. And that's why France is wary of religion, of religion we would call not extreme, but, ostentatious, I think is a good word.
Yeah.
Religion more than we would be in other countries.
Yeah. Well, you defend the point very well. I'm more of in my mindset, I'm more in the American mindset where I think it wouldn't hurt anything to let girls go to school with a head covering, not full veil, but you can't even have a handkerchief. I mean, you can't have anything.
You can't have a headscarf.
No headscarf, no. And I understand why they want that. They want everybody to be the same in front of education. You're here to get your education. This is not indoctrination. And also, they want to avoid issues where girls between themselves say, see, I'm a better Muslim than you are because I cover up and you don't. That sort of thing is also a problem. But I think it doesn't hurt anything to let them. I don't know. Maybe I'm too optimistic on this. I think it's better to not antagonize people on their religion.
Well, I think we get back to what we were discussing earlier, which is on each of those points is not a problem taken alone.
Yeah, but you could take it to an extreme.
Again, I was saying I'm a convinced and almost militant feminist, which again doesn't mean the same thing in France, I think, as it does in other countries. Militant doesn't mean I'm going to be actively violent or anything like that. But I do think that one of the key issues we have with some of the tenets of extreme versions of Islam is the place it puts women in.
Oh, yeah.
And the headscarf is fine when women can be, anything they want, and they just have to wear a headscarf the same way men have to wear a kippah in Judaism. But I think a lot of those examples are just symptoms of a much deeper attack of women's freedom. And that is a big concern for me because I do tend to agree with you there because it's a slippery slope. But anyway, so where do you think this is going? Where do you see France in a year or 2 or 3? Oh God, I don't know.
Can you take any guesses?
I could give you my hopes.
Okay, that's good too.
So, okay, I'm going to give you hopes and guesses. Guesses, I think there's going to be, on the tech side of things, there's going to be bad decisions that are going to be made. I'm hoping they won't, but I think they will be, especially on the cryptography side of things. I think backdoors might be mandated, which would be a horrible decision for a number of reasons that I'm not going to get into. But trust me, everyone who knows anything about this will tell you it's very likely not going to be useful at all, and it's going to have adverse consequences to people's freedoms. So anyway,
that's a de facto situation in the U.S. though. Backdoors into
no. Actually, interestingly, the U.S. government has discussed this for a few months in the past year, and they've come to the conclusion that mandating backdoors in software like, Apple's iMessage or Skype or things like that, mandating them would not be effective, and they were not going to pursue that course of action.
Okay.
It happened just maybe a month or 6 weeks ago.
Okay.
And now everyone's coming back to that debate, and it seems now the first pieces of information we're getting now, ironically, is that the people who perpetrated the attacks in last week used unencrypted SMS messages. Mm-hmm. So all of the people who are already starting to say, "Oh, they used encrypted messages, and that's why we didn't see it coming."
No, it wasn't encrypted.
Yeah. Right. It seems that way anyway. But even if it wasn't the case, backdoors would be a bad idea. Anyway, what I would hope in other areas would be that we have a clear message to instances of extreme Islam in France that this is not acceptable anymore because this is France and we have a republic. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I would hope that France accepts and demonstratively accepts the idea that Islam is a part of French society, just like Christianity and Judaism and any other religion, and that even beyond that, people who are second, third generations of immigrants, mostly Northern African, as I was saying, are French. And that is just what French society is now. Mm-hmm. And you are going to have people called, Mohammed and Abdul and, who are just part of who we are now. Yeah. And you're going to have someone who is a little bit darker skinned than you are, who's going to be called Charles or, whatever. And I honestly think, no, I don't think. I hope we're getting back in the hope area now. I really hope that this realization that there are some elements of Islam. I'm sure they're extreme and rare, but you have videos going around now on the web showing some of the preachings happening in French on the French territory in French mosques that are some people preaching the idea that music is against God and that Satan has put music in the world to pervert the pure mind of the believers. And so anyone would agree that this is unacceptable. No one will ever say, "Oh yeah, this is fine, this is." But I think we have to realize that this is happening and that we should clearly send a message that there are some elements that are unacceptable. And again, another hope would be that, and I'm starting to see this already, that some representatives of the Muslim communities voice their opposition to these forms of extreme Islam, and it's happening already. It's definitely. I've seen. We're talking about videos going around on social media. And I've seen a couple of videos where, people of obvious North African descent were explaining, very angrily at those, kids, or usually they're under 30, but those kids explaining how France does nothing for them and they want to live Islamic life and then they go out and buy sneakers and, drink all night and, and it's, And anyway, I don't want to redo that whole debate, but, again, it's sorry, just to finish, it's even more complicated by the fact that a lot of that antagonism from some of the, immigrant youth or not immigrant, but, second, third generation, immigrant youth is caused by a clear lack of integration and
there needs to be jobs for these kids.
Yeah, a milder version of what you're seeing in the U.S. that is realizing that racism actually isn't over. I think there's a mild version of this in France as well. So it's very difficult to untangle because those reactions can be explained by a responsibility on the white French population but at the same time, it veers to extremes that are unacceptable. So anyway.
Yeah. It's funny because I don't think we agree on the reasons why these things happen, but we do agree on the hope we have. I really hope that France comes to the point where more of these kids who are obviously from different ethnic backgrounds than I am get hired and get good training and get opportunities in France because their parents and their grandparents who were also living in France were better integrated than they are, which is...
That's crazy, isn't it?
It's a sad state of affairs, but I grew up in a very blue-collar area in Toulouse, and there were Muslim families living right where I was in the same apartment building, and the parents were totally integrated. They totally went to work, and the kids went to school, and religion was never discussed. Now, probably there are people who are going to say, well, you were crushing their soul or something, but they didn't seem to be unhappy about it. They seemed to be just fine with it.
I think, a lot of those... So I don't know if many people know this, but I'm actually not French. I wasn't born French.
No way.
No, I'm not. I was, I'm actually, and I realized this very recently with the issues of refugees coming from Syria. I'm actually a war refugee.
Oh, wow.
I obviously not in the dismal conditions that those poor people have been facing, but my family came to France when I was very young. I was 2 years old, and we came from Lebanon because we were running away from the war. So I wasn't born French. I gained the nationality. When we came in, we lived in a very small apartment in a nice part of the country. So that was nice. But there were, 7 of us in a studio for a few months or a year. I can't remember. And I was part of that crowd. And I'm not as... We left with nothing, we had our suitcases and nothing, and that's what we had. So it wasn't an easy situation, but still, I'm white, I'm very white, so I'm not judged by the color of my skin.
Right, and your name is, Patrick Béja.
Yes,
there
exactly.
You go. I'm not
cold. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I'm not trying to compare the situations in any way, but I just want to say I'm also from a different background initially, and my parents, who have very thick accents, are very much integrated, and they are, but they have been to an extent subjected to, I remember my mom telling me that when she would talk to someone, when she was sending letters, it was fine, and then she would pick up the phone and they would hear her accent, and then the tone would change,
things change,
things like
change,
that.
Yeah.
But it did happen. I don't think it was
anywhere
as bad as it is now.
Every family is different, but it used to be better. So we really need to get back to this kind of acceptance, I hope. And I have some hope. There was this little old Parisian lady, also something going around.
Yeah, that was beautiful.
On social media. Yeah, saying, I hope that we fraternize with the millions of Muslims who are in France who do not want to harm us in any way, and come down like a ton of bricks on the few that want to cause us harm. Yeah. And that's what I hope we're going to do.
And I think, I think it's a given that we're going to come down like a ton of bricks on the others. I mean, it seems certainly that we're going to be going that route. It's not as obvious that we are going to be making the others feel welcome and part of society.
Right.
And I mean, we come back to the question of how do we make them feel welcome and doctors and meals and pools and stuff like that. But
they shouldn't push our buttons either. We shouldn't push their buttons, and they shouldn't push ours.
I mean,
that's
I think
the thing.
Yeah, how do you define again pushing buttons? It's so complicated, but I think the one thing we'll all agree on is that the one thing that they want, the terrorists, is to divide us, and it is exactly to make the West hate Muslims, so that once that happens, they will have a much easier time getting the Muslims to rally to their cause and to show, hey, look at that, they hate us and they want to kill us. And exactly.
Yeah.
And honestly, I really think that I've seen a lot more support of the Muslim populations and Muslim communities than I've seen condemning. So I'm hopeful. I honestly am.
Yeah, so am I. Well, Patrick, we've been talking for an hour and 15 minutes. I think we're going to have to let this come to a close. But it's been very entertaining. Well, entertaining. It's been very interesting for me to listen to your point of view because you are more French than I am. Lebanese parents and all.
Yeah, I feel, maybe that's why I'm so attached to the idea of the Republic. It's because I have absolutely no French roots, like none. And I still feel extremely French. So maybe that's why.
And I definitely think that visiting France is not all that dangerous, even with events like this.
Yeah, agreed.
All right. Thank you very much, Patrick.
Thank you, Annie.
I'll keep listening to your show.
Oh,
I enjoy
thanks.
them. It's fun because I'm not all that techie. I mean, but I enjoy the game one. I don't get. If you do a game show, I'm like, I've never played a game other than solitaire. So je suis largué.
No, but you were half joking saying it was entertaining. I really think that it should be. I think that it's important, maybe, a little bit less in instances like this, but even on the political show I try to discuss serious topics with a lot of, good spirit and good humor, because I think it's important that these discussions don't become dry and boring. Mm-hmm. And I think we do that pretty well in podcasting. So,
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, Elise. Well, we are recording this episode before Thanksgiving, but next time you appear on the podcast will be after Thanksgiving. So I thought you should, say something about Thanksgiving that I'm going to add.
Gobble, 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 gobble. No. Yeah, it's my favorite holiday.
Wow.
And it's the exact moment of the year, as long as I've been living in France, when I get homesick for the United States.
Yeah.
I love Thanksgiving, and I love the food, and I love whatever it is. And it's interesting that it's the holiday. It's like sometimes I think, this week I'm feeling kind of down. And then I go, of course you're feeling down. It's the week of Thanksgiving. What is it, Joe? It's really weird.
It's true. It's not a big deal here at all.
It's not a deal here at all.
I have given up on doing a full turkey, even though I can by now. I know I have my sources. I know how to get a full turkey. But the problem is they sell me these huge turkeys that are going to be like 12 kilos, so 25 pounds or something, or 30 pounds.
With huge legs.
Huge legs, because turkeys are bred for legs in France for the most part. It's not like American turkeys that are bred for breasts.
Right.
Anyway, so I'm just going to do legs.
You're going to do pieces, huh?
I'm going to do legs, yeah.
I'm actually I ordered a small farm turkey. It probably costs so much that I hope everybody appreciates it.
I know, it's going to be $100.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It probably also will have very weird long legs, but it'll be small enough so that I could put it in the oven. But I'm going to do a little bit more low key this time, and that's just for all kinds of other reasons. But it is true that I love the Thanksgiving meal, and hard enough to, as you know, we've done this. We've had meals together, and getting the stuff to make pumpkin pie, which I'm apparently the only one who eats. It's like I
don't know why you bother.
Because I love it.
Do it with potimarron.
Yeah, that's true.
Potimarron is similar to pumpkin. Very easy to find.
It's got a nice texture.
It has a beautiful texture. Right. It's very nice. If you do it with butternut squash,
it's not
watery, quite
right?
the same. Yeah, but with potimarron, it's pretty good.
But I guess it's always been a meal I've loved. I love all that kind of food. And the 2 or 3 times I've tried to invite, this was a long time ago, French friends who have no connection to the United States, is that they kind of go, what is this?
Yeah, what is this? And why on a Thursday night?
Yeah.
Because it's not a holiday. So everybody goes to work the day off. The next day, everybody's at work. And so if you I invite my French family, they always want their Thanksgiving feast.
Because they're used to it.
Because they're used to it by now. But they don't want to do it on the Thursday night.
No.
Because that's just like,
it's a work night.
Yeah, it's a work night. So we're probably going to do a small, low-key Thanksgiving.
Right.
on Thursday night, and then the big one with family on Friday night.
Oh, Friday night. I'm
Friday
not even going to do Friday night. I'm just going to do weekend. It's like, there are certain concessions you just have to make, So
Yeah.
You're in another country. But it's funny, it's like I guess there are certain things that you hold on to as tradition no matter what,
Yeah.
And so I don't know why.
Did you find cranberries?
No, I have a friend who always manages to stock a few packages, and so she's the one that's going to bring some kind of cranberry thing.
Yeah.
I mean, you can get some kind of
made
cranberry thing here, but can you get the berries?
Yes, I got some berries at the restaurant supply store.
There.
Yeah.
That's the big
They
secret.
appear as if by magic.
Really?
Right before Thanksgiving, and then they're going to be gone.
And
they're
that's
going to
it.
be here till after Christmas and then gone.
Yeah.
But I bought some, and I made my first cranberry sauce thing. Yesterday I made the plain one. And then I'll make some jalapeno one and then some orange one.
Oh,
Love that stuff.
love that stuff too.
It's horrible. I love it.
Anyway, happy Thanksgiving out there to everybody.
Yes, happy Thanksgiving, everybody. This brings us to the end of another Join Us in France travel podcast. You can leave a comment on the website, follow us on Facebook, or look for @ParisPodcast on Twitter. I put lots of information on Facebook and Twitter that never makes it into the shows. And also, this is a subliminal message. Join the mailing list. Now, today. You can do that on joinusinfriends.com. Look for the green button. Et c'est tout pour aujourd'hui.